Unreal, man. It's so cool. We had the 8.5-hour drive yesterday into Hearst, and it kept getting prettier and prettier as we got more and more north. It's my first float plane trip ever. But I guess we gotta weigh in, we gotta do all that stuff, and then get the boats packed up, and then just, not the boats and planes, boat planes, and then get over to the lodge. First time for a lot of things on this trip, so it'll be really cool. Nice. This is the time that I took a trip to the Northern Territories to target pike for the first time. Warm water species has never been something that I targeted on purpose. And for this trip, that's exactly what we were going to do, which is target northern pike. Now, I've had a few adventures with the SoFly crew before, but nothing this extensive. The first thing that we had to do was drive 9 hours north from Toronto. So my wife Taylor dropped me off in a parking lot where I met Aldo. From there, we went to Toronto. I spent the night. We woke up at about 4 a.m. and it was off to get the rest of the crew. For this trip that consisted of me, Adis, Aldo, and Nick. Adis and Aldo are part of the SoFly crew. Nick is a photographer, runs the account at Samographer, and is an incredible angler and fly tyer.
It's 5 a.m. We just got Nick. We're on the 400. Highway of 400, that is.
Oh, what? Shout out 400.
Which is the highway up north. We're just around Barrie, Ontario. We've got about 900 kilometers to cover. We're going out to Hearst, Ontario. Hearst is where we're going to meet our float plane tomorrow at Hearst Air. Melanie and her team. Awesome. My first float plane trip ever was with them 7 years ago, and super stoked to get flying with them again. Hey, boys?
Yeah.
Let's go.
Wow.
Brunswick Lake Lodge.
Wow.
The drive was long, but we actually had a decent amount of time to talk expectation for the trip. We were shooting for Discover Ontario and Algoma Country, so we had some work to do as well as chat about pike fishing, which this time of year was something that was super new to the guys. Used to fishing spring or fall for pike. Spring where they're up in these sandy, shallow beds just after the spawn, where the big ones will come from the deeper part of the lake. And in the fall, they're kind of in the shallows again. They're doing the same thing. They're feeding really hard in preparation for the winter. I had no idea where they were going to be because I've never done this before. Aldo, Adis, and Nick had a ton of experience with pike. They were able to kind of pinpoint that they were most likely going to be in the drop-offs just below the weeds in these bigger lakes. We got into the town of Hearst around 2 or 3 in the afternoon. We ended up getting some last-minute groceries because when you travel into a lodge by float plane, if they don't already have someone there who is bringing in foods or they have a cook or something like that, you have to fly in all your own stuff. And for these outposts/lodges where they have a full-scale lodge, and they've got a few people on the grounds running it, but you kind of fend for yourself in terms of meals. So we brought in our own food, we brought in our own drinks. The kind people at Muskoka Brewers sent us in with some beers and some non-alcoholic beers for our days spent out on the boat. From there, we go to the motel, we'd spend the night, In the morning, we'd meet up with Melanie at Hearst Air, and they'd fly us into the lodge.
Okay, it's 5 o'clock. We just got to Hearst Air. It's just as awesome as it was 7 years ago. First step with the float plane is to unload and do the weigh-in. So we just backed up to the weigh-in station, and then we're going to be taking either one of these, which I think that's the Beaver, and this is the Turbo Beaver. And these are still the same planes. These are de Havilland's. They've been in service since like the 60s. And they're still like the workhorse of the North. So it's super cool. And Hearst Air's planes are painted like they're awesome. Well, we're stoked. We're stoked. We had a good sleep, and we're excited to see Brunswick Lake Lodge. Like, we're stoked. I'm stoked to see Melanie, who runs Hearst Air, because I haven't seen her in 7 years. And it'll be great.
So as we're sitting in the float plane and we're flying over the huge expanse of the Northern Territory, and even Aldo tapped me on the shoulder and he was like, hey, look out for moose and bears because you can see them in the clearing. Especially in a float plane, you're down pretty low, so you do have a lot more visibility. And I think all of that was just part of this crazy northern experience that I've never, ever had the chance to do before now. We landed and got our first looks at the Brunswick Lake Lodge, which was stunning in itself. It's the only lodge, I believe, on the lake. Because we had the earlier flight in on day one, we actually were able to get on some boats, get some gear set up, and head out on the lake for the day. With still water, I have no idea what to do. Where are the pike sitting in the season? How low does our line have to get down? I've never had to use sinking line or sinking leaders or anything like that. Or on the first day, we were kind of like, well, maybe they'll be really aggressive and sitting in shallow water. So I had a floating setup, which we later kind of turned into a hybrid setup where we put a floating line and then we had Rio sink tip on there, and then we had our pike gear with the toothy critter leaders and all that stuff. But it was really interesting. That first day I'm trying to cast, and I'm used to casting a 5-weight with a elk hair's caddis on it. I can't get it at 10 feet off the boat. Adis and Nick were in a boat together, and myself and Aldo were in a boat the first day. Aldo got onto a few fish. Nick and Adis were hammering fish kind of day one. Like, if you love streamer fishing, like, this is the epitome of streamer fishing. It is so much fun. When a pike hits, they hit so hard. And I had kind of been feeling it that first day, like stripping and waiting for things to sink was something that was out of my wheelhouse. So I was trying to dial that in on the first day, and right when we were about to turn in and go have some dinner, I got my first pike. I was really down through some weeds, so I thought that I had snagged on weeds again and set into the fish and pulled up my first pike. My first pike ever.
Okay, let's go make some mango salsa. So Nick was so nice to go and fillet the fish and clean the fish that we caught. David, who's behind the camera right now, caught a bunch of fish. And actually, you caught the biggest perch. So we got some walleye, we got some perch, and we're gonna make some fish tacos. We're gonna quickly make some mango salsa, and we've got rice going and onion sauteing inside. Idis is tying flies, so that's good. And then we'll make some margaritas.
A lot of firsts on this trip. First float plane, first pike, first trip to the Northern Territories, first walleye that I've ever caught and eaten. The firsts that were on this trip were kind of like monumental and really, really cool as an angler. Randy was talking about and Melanie was talking about like there are big fish in this lake and I wanted to see one for myself and I had 2 chances. I had a huge fish take my fly. And right as Adis had seen this overhanging tree, he had I think he was changing flies or something like that. So he's like, go cast in there. And I was like, all right, I'll cast in. Because of the shade, I watched a chartreuse fly go in the water. I watched it sink down a little bit and then I watched it just take off to the right. And I was like, oh man, that's a fish. And the second that I set, my line just started peeling out of my hand. I got up to my reel, and then the second that I got to my reel, I'm watching the fly because I haven't had this happen before. Started to hunker down and be like, okay, I gotta think this through and actually fight this fish smart. But the second that I started to actually calm myself down, because of course I'm screaming, I'm like, well, okay, we haven't seen a fish take this much line yet. I can see it go down underneath a log, wrap around 15 times, and then it got stuck on the fly on my line underneath the water 10-15 feet away. And right as that happened, I was like, oh man, I'm gonna lose this fish. And then the second that it just goes tight and then everything just stopped moving, my line stopped pulling, everything started, I watched the fish just kind of disappear into the weeds. My stomach dropped after feeling that thing fight, and I knew I had to get on something else like that. I had to find another fish in this lake. Day 3, Nick and I were paired up. We went up to a new spot in the lake. We kind of puttered all the way into Pike Bay. And once we got into that spot, the fishing was on immediately. I was on a pike within a couple minutes, and then I caught my first walleye. I caught a walleye on the fly, which was kind of sick. They fight way different than a pike. You'll want to strip set into them because you have a pretty hefty leader. And it's kind of a little bit like saltwater fishing where if there's a tarpon way out in front of me, you don't want to trout set. You don't want to rip your hand up like that. You kind of want to just set into them, and then you can bring your rod up and start fighting it on the butt of the rod. Whereas walleye will they'll take it and they fight and they kind of feel like maybe a rainbow trout, where they eat things and then you just kind of feel this, you kind of feel the shaking the whole way. They're kind of fighting you all the way to the boat. Just after that walleye, maybe a couple casts afterwards, we had gone onto a few smaller little torpedo size pike. When Nick and I are sitting in the boat, we had just motored up to the top of the lake again because we're going to do that drift down with the wind. I cast in, I got a few good strips, and then all of a sudden, I could feel my line burning, stripping finger, my line finger. I was like, Nick, and he was, he's like, that one's a good one, dude, that's a good one. And my line all the way through, I'm dancing around on the boat because there's so many snags in these tin boats. I'm trying to get my chacos unsnagged from everything. I'm trying to get and as I'm doing that, I come up and I see this fish come to the bow of the boat and it flips on its side. And I mean, everybody's going to exaggerate in their fishing stories a little bit, but I tried to find a reference point so that I could measure this fish up before I continued fighting it. And it came up to the bow of the boat, and on the first seat, And where I was standing, which was the tip of the boat, that fish was like nose to tail that size, which on pretty much any aluminum boat, you can kind of picture how long that is, like mid-30s range. And like the body of it was humongous. A deep dive. It just turns around and it goes like straight into the water. The second it did that, I fought it for a second, and then my rod just went boink. Again, devastated because this fish was unreal, and I got to see it up close. We hadn't seen something, between the four of us, we hadn't seen a fish that size on this trip. I sat for a second silently, reflecting. Just before that, Nick was like, my wire bite that I had on the end was just a little bit shorter than he'd like, and he was like, you'll be fine. Like, we hadn't been catching fish that big, so like it wasn't a problem. Snaps me off like a couple inches past where my wire bite was. It just sheared my leader off. That day though was cool because it was one of the only days we did a shore lunch. We brought some chili, we brought some hot dogs, we made a fire on the shore, beached the boats, and had a warm meal in the middle of the rainstorm, which definitely kept us going for the next couple of hours that we were going to spend on the lake. We knew it was our last day, so we hit up all the spots that we had lost big fish. Aldo had lost a big fish earlier on in the week. Actually, I think it was day 2. So we all saw these fish, and we all had made adjustments too to not be losing these fish, like having a lot more wire bite and making sure that our gear could handle what we needed to do. We were being smart about hook sets, but just every single time it wasn't in our favor. The last day that we were there, the weather was still a little bit choppy. Plane kept getting delayed, and that flight was a little bit different than the flight in. We had white caps on the water, but with heavy winds in a small plane, the odds of you having some turbulence are definitely high. But we got back safely, obviously, and we landed, got everything unloaded, and that was the trip. I figured for this trip, because I had a bunch of footage, that it would be a good opportunity to start up something where I kind of recount the stories that I've done and use a lot of the footage that before now has kind of been unusable. Some of my experiences and being able to publish more here to YouTube and some long form content for you guys to watch. If you haven't already, feel free to subscribe, like, share these videos, comment if you want to see certain trips or you've seen things on Instagram and TikTok and you want to hear more about them. It really helps me figure out the content that you guys want to see. So thank you so much for watching. We'll see you guys.
Time's been running out, I knew you couldn't last. Sand slips through our hands like an hourglass. You kept it dragging me down, down into your past. Oh no, 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 no.